I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Rob Carter, who was kind enough to be with us here this afternoon. He is Executive VP, Information Services, and CIO at FedEx. He's a member of their 5-person executive committee, which plans and executes the company's strategy. He joined FedEx 17 plus years ago, but has 30 years of experience in the development and implementation expertise in the sort of IT and systems area. So a gentleman with deep experience at one of the companies that is doing leading edge work in this space. So let me introduce Rob. Nice to have you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me today. It's a little bit of an intimidating audience for me because, you know, normally I can come in and talk about networks and talk about connectivity and feel like that, you know, FedEx is really the, you know, the edge of, in many ways, innovation or enterprise implementation with regard to these things. But in this room, you know, that's you, and I'm here, you know, to some degree to talk about the practicalities of it in the enterprise implementation. But in order to do that, I felt that the best way to approach it was to really kind of talk about it in a chronological fashion. You know, we're proud at FedEx that we believe in many ways we have changed what's possible. The focus that we've had over the years is enabling a connected world in so many different ways. But I found that, you know, one of the best ways to look at this is to look at it in the form of, you know, how did we, what steps did we go through to change what was possible? What are we doing today, you know, with today's technology to change what's possible? And then maybe a final look at, you know, as we look ahead, what do we think it's going to mean to change what's possible in the future? So if you'll bear with me, that's the sequence of things that I'd like to put out in front of you. When the company began a little over 35 years ago, we began as a domestic U.S. company, and we kind of launched ourselves as America's new airline. You know, America, you've got a new airline. Some of you in the room are old enough to remember those commercials. They showed little Falcon jets, you know, all lined up, and people thought basically that Fred Smith was nuts. You know, all this investment, all these things to do what? To deliver some new postal stuff, to take the place of the Postal Service. Well, that certainly was not what Fred's vision about the company was. Fred always looked at the company, and when I talk about Fred Smith, I'm talking about our founder and CEO. Fred's been my boss for the last decade or so. Fascinating individual that I think history will hold up in very high regard with having changed what's possible in a connected logistics world. You know, really introducing a lot of new capabilities to the globe that the globe was hungry for with regard to how to make connections work in the physical world. But it was very important for Fred to, you know, as he launched this company, not just to be focused on an airline that would carry documents around. Fred always believed that the world was changing very fast at that point in time with the introduction of computer technology with high value added, you know, kind of high price per pound things, atoms, you know, that needed to be picked up and put down to service computers, to service high value equipment around the world. So the company wasn't founded on the notion of the overnight letter. The company was founded on the notion of fast cycle replenishment, fast cycle parts, those kinds of things that would enable computers to stay up and running and very valuable equipment and plant to be serviced in significant ways. But one of the things that gets missed about this story is that it was always the tale of two networks. It wasn't just about launching new physical connectivity. It was also about launching informational connectivity that went along with that. So the physical networks were being out there to connect people, to connect places, to be able to move atoms. And the network of atoms is, to this day, a very important network for FedEx. You know, whether it's planes, whether it's ocean going, whether it's vehicles over the road or rail, you know, those networks are critical. But the network that I'm responsible for at the company is the network of bits that provides visibility into what's happening in the physical network. That's a very critical point for us, is that back in 1978, inside of our company, Mr. Smith made a very important and directional comment for us. He made a proclamation to his company in 1978 that the information about the package was as important as the package itself. Well, even inside the company, that seemed like a strange thing to say because there was virtually no information about the package. Transportation systems were black holes. Things went in one side and popped out the other side when they felt like it. And companies never had the ability to plan their supply chains or plan their logistics operations based on some visibility from an information standpoint about what was happening in this physical world. So that chronology inside of our company is really quite interesting because it always pushed the edge of connection. That was where we thought about it. How do you stretch the edge of connection in ways that enable you to move farther and farther out to the endpoint where you're picking something up from a customer, taking custodial control of it, and putting it down and relinquishing that custody to the destination customer, the consignee at that point. And how could you do that with a great deal of information that would not only allow you to manage that movement effectively, but provide transparency and visibility to it, to the world that was anxious to know. So this timeline that I've got up here is kind of an interesting one. It shows some of the early innovations in moving the edge. Cosmos was one of the first ones. We believe this was probably the first commercial handheld that took place out at the edge. We were actually hiring electrical engineers and, designing with companies. That's a NORAD device there, so we had partners, and we've always had partners. But we were designing something that you could actually take out with you to the edge and create data and information about those handoff points that a shipment went through in its life cycle. And so Cosmos was launched in 1979. So the very first part of our information trail began to take shape in 1979. The next thing we did, I think this group will find interesting. In 1980, we launched the product called DADS, which was the Digitally Assisted Dispatch System. And the interesting thing about DADS was we knew that we needed telecommunications connectivity to make this work in our vehicles. So we actually went out and procured, coast to coast, we went out and procured 800 megahertz spectrum, and we ran repeaters and towers on top of buildings. There were obviously no cell networks at the time, nothing that allowed that class of telecommunications to work. So we had to go out and buy it and build it. And up until very recently, some of those towers and repeaters were still out there. One example of using that was when Katrina hit New Orleans. We actually worked with FEMA and the 102nd Airborne, and we activated, I have a picture, and I probably should put it in the presentation like this, but I have a picture of a helicopter landing on top of one of the buildings in New Orleans with one of our technicians and a generator. And the idea was to fire up that repeater on top of that network, and we distributed some of the radios that we had that allowed you to drive that network out there because the cell networks were fundamentally crippled at that point in time in the city. So, but the DADS network was really an interesting stretch of the edge because it allowed us to take mobile telecommunications out on the road. It's not present in this one, but the little slot up in the upper right of the device was where you shooed your handheld computer. So that handheld computer at the point in time shoot in that device and began to transmit the data out over the network about what had just happened in the sequence of delivery events out there. Well, all of those things were sort of inside the company. We had a series of call centers that could allow you as a FedEx customer to call and make the connection with us. And because we had some of this data, we could tell you some information about the package and its journey and where it was if it had been delivered. But then something really important, I think, began to change in about 1984. That was when we began to introduce customer-based technology, when we began to say, you know what, we've got this information, we've got it in databases, we use it for customer service, we use it for operational excellence inside the company, but wouldn't it be interesting if you could turn it inside out and hold it out to the customer and say, you can see this information. You have the ability to inquire and interrogate the same information. So the Power Tracker, the Power Ship and the Super Tracker began to evolve so that they actually inverted this information and pushed it inside out to the customer. So we were actually, we had the ability at that point in time for customers using their America Online accounts and CompuServe accounts. They could dial in and see shipment information. We handed out little discs that would allow you to load stuff on your computer to see the information. But in 1994, something really interesting happened. And I was talking with the team about this recently. We actually invited Bill Joy to come in, and he talked to us, and he goes, show me your website. And I was, I had I wasn't the CTO at the time, but I had a group called Strategic Information Systems. And I said, we don't actually have a website. And he goes, well, you're behind. You need to get a website. You need to go out and, and capture your domains. And so, these were in the Mosaic days. Netscape hadn't even really come onto the scene. So we were going, okay, well, we better get a website. If Bill Joy says you need a website, you need a website. But the guys that worked in the labs at that point in time thought websites were really uninteresting. So they didn't want to launch a website that just was a message from the CEO. Virtually every website at that point in time was just, HTML pages that had information. But because these guys had so much connectivity DNA, because we had already been allowing customers to get two-package tracking information, they said, well, what would really be cool is if we launched a tracking page out there. And so our very first website was a page that would allow you to go to FedEx.com and to actually track a package. And, it's still an exciting thing for us. We won a Smithsonian Award for that, and as far as we know still, it was really the first commercial site that allowed you to actually do something, to create a transactional interaction on the internet where you could key in your tracking number and we would deliver a page back to you that showed that tracking information. So it was an exciting beginning for us of saying, hey, once again, this edge of connection continues to move out. We've throughout the rest of the life cycle deployed technologies that we always felt like were trying to drive the edge of connection in ways that would extend what we could do and what we could see out at the edge. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of those.